Johnnie Walker. He's on!
There we go. Who recognises that tune now? Oh, there must be a few more of you who recognise it. Now, who recognises the tune, eh? That's more like it. Ladies and gentlemen, can I please introduce to you the man behind the tune, Johnnie Walker!
Well, there's a turn up for the books then.
This is where things come to a complete and utter standstill now. That's what you call a photo opportunity now, Big John.
Sounds
Go on, flash away.
It's amazing, really. 20 years on, that we're all still here together, which I think is wonderful. But it's lovely,
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Johnny said to me earlier on, if anybody asks you where the photographs are taken, tell them they're taken in 1968. Listen, it's 20 years ago today that we are celebrating here. We were on the air with LBC last night, reminiscing on some of those experiences then. You just said it's amazing to be here 20 years after. It really is. How long ago does it seem to you? I mean, does it really seem that long ago, or does it seem like yesterday?
No, it's just like yesterday. And the amazing thing is when you hear tapes of that midnight announcement, it just brings back all the feeling and all the emotion that was going on at the time. And you just knew that there were millions out there who were just wanting us to go on. Because I think when Radio London said that they'd continue broadcasting and then change their mind, I think a lot of people were worried perhaps that Caroline might do the same thing. So it was a magic moment.
Now, it's actually quite unusual because we've often heard of the broadcast that you made. Obviously, it's a legendary broadcast now. But the North Ship, of course, carried on at the same time, didn't it? And it's often forgotten as to what happened there at midnight. Did you sort of listen to one another? Were you capable of doing that on the Me and Me?
No, I was a bit busy at the time.
I'm sure you were, yes.
We had a lot of journalists out as well, and press photographers and things, so the studio was really crowded. And a bottle of champagne went off. And I mean, the thing that was at the back of my mind of Robbie Dale's was how we're going to keep the thing going, because DJs had said they were going to stay. Didn't have the week of support that we had in London, and they'd spent a lot of time sitting out on the ship worrying about what life was going to be like after August 14. So I can understand them deciding not to go ahead with it. We heard this sort of shout the next morning, and it was about 9:30 in the morning, and we went up on deck, and there was this tiny little inflatable dinghy there with a minuscule outboard motor on the deck. This guy said, "Oh, brought you fellas the papers and some fags and some fruit gums. I'm on holiday doing some fishing at Clacton, and I just wanted to come and help you out." And he said, "Anything I can get you?" You know, he says, and so for the week that he went to Clacton for his fishing holiday, he came out at 3.5 miles every morning to bring us the papers. And he said, and we said, "Well, can we give you some money for the petrol?" I said, "No," he said, "I wanted money." He said, Just the buzz of helping you out and being able to tell my mates in the pub when I get back." So he was the first guy who really broke the Marine Offences Act from the supply point of view.
That really was lovely.
Wonderful fella. Don't know, I'd love to meet him again.
You never know, he might be here somewhere tonight.
Well, you come up here by now.
Tell me, I heard you saying last night that you had some trouble with your kissing the car licences. I didn't know that. When you came to have them printed, apparently, at the time. I was most amused with that story. Tell us again, for those who didn't hear last night.
Well, I had this idea of doing this long record at 11:30 and getting people to sort of kiss all the way through it, because a lot of people were doing that, of course, at 11:30 at night. And so I thought what would be a nice idea was to send them a license to make them sort of an official Caroline kiss in the car type couple. So I did this blag that I'd talk to all the chief constables, and as long as the license was shown on the windscreen, then they wouldn't be bothered by the police or anything. So I designed it, obviously, to look like the tax disc. And I went to this printer in Birmingham, and I said, "Can you do us 20,000 of these?" So he thought, "What's this scam going on here?" He said, "Radio Caroline, what's all this about?" He said, that looks to me like a facsimile of the route fundraise. So I said, yeah, it does, Rod. I said, but don't worry, I've cleared it with the head of police in Birmingham, and he says it's completely okay. So he said, oh, well, that's all right then. So it went ahead. Usual Walker flannel, you know.
Now, of course, on board the ship at the same time as things happened that night was Robbie Dale, and one other person as well, wasn't he? He was sort of hidden away in the background at the time. Who was the other person that was on with you at the time?
The guy who came out with us on the final tender from England, although there was one more, we can perhaps get to that in a minute. I think it was Ross McRae, or Ross Brown.
Ross Brown, I think.
Ross Brown, yeah. Who I read the news on Radio City, and had never done a DJ show. So Robbie and I thought, wow, we've got to try and run Caroline with sort of 2 and a bit DJs. But then...
things don't change, believe me.
Ronan and his cronies, after hearing about the walk-off, you see, on that afternoon, were scouring the streets of London for anybody idiot enough to be talked into it. And I mean, Ronan has this technique of, you know, if he can convince you it's a good idea to stand on your head in the middle of Oxford Circus. So it wasn't too difficult. So he found a few guys who could string a few words together and say, you've got to get out to Caroline, the nation needs you, baby, you know. One of them was Chris Carey, otherwise known as Spangles Muldoon. And he said, well, I've got a passport. Don't worry about that, baby. You just get down to Felixstowe. Don't need a passport. So they managed to get one last legal tender from England, sort of thing, which got to the ship, I think, about 11:45. And Spangles was on there. And after about 3 weeks, he said, it really would be nice to sort of go and have a bit of shore leave. So he talked to the captain. He said, well, you haven't got a passport, have you? And he said, no, I haven't. Ronan said it didn't matter. So the captain of the tender refused to take him over to Holland because he knew that he'd never be let into Holland. So he was stuck on the boat, and after about 3 months, he finally started to twig it that he was there forever unless he did something. So a few days later, it was a nice sunny day, and a few yachts came out for a visit. And at 6 o'clock, we sit around the table for some food. No Spangles. Anybody seen Spangles? Where's Spangles? So we went calling around looking for him. Not a sign. So then we twigged what happened. So he got a lift on this yacht to Frinton, got on the train, went to Birmingham, had a wonderful night of passion with his girlfriend in Birmingham, went to the passport office, got his passport, and then came down to Clacton and borrowed a little rowing boat that they hire for going around the harbour, and proceeded to head out into the North Sea in this tiny little rowing boat. And it's a very dangerous sea. There's all sorts of currents and things. So it was a miracle that he made it. And again, we hear this shout from the ocean. So Robbie and I go out there, and there's Spangles saying, I'm here. I'm bloody freezing. Threw us a leg up. So then the captain came out and he said, no, can't come on board, can't come on board. So he said, oh, come on, don't be ridiculous. No, illegal alien, you know. He's not being tricked customs. So poor old Spangles was hanging on to the anchor chain, shivering like crazy. It's about 7 o'clock at night. So Robbie said, he said to him, I think we better take the captain down to his cabin and get the bowls out, the old Dutch gin. So he took the captain down there and he was chatting about the weather and pouring another gin. After about half a dozen, we said, hey, listen, you can't leave it hang on to the anchor chain all night, you know. So Spangles got back on board with his passport. A very enterprising young man, actually.
Oh, we do.
Was Spangles Muldoon, yeah.
Went on to bigger things later on, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
Now, tell me, I mean, obviously we moved on then into the what they call the illegal era, I suppose, but we don't like to think of it that way. Things have changed dramatically over the years, obviously. We've seen lots of history going through the old 60s stations there from 1964 upwards, right through the 70s up to the present day. We were listening to you yesterday talking a bit about the radio scene as it is now, and of course you went across to the United States for a while to work out there. Now that you've come back again and rejoined the fold here, pleased to see you back again on Radio 1 then. How have things changed in that time? Do you think that they've changed for the better? Has it improved now and things are beginning to look the way they should after all these years?
Well, I used to work at Radio 1, actually, before I got photographed with Ronan. at Driftback 87. Any photos that were taken in 1968. It's in some ways it's changed a lot, Radio 1, and in other ways it's sort of exactly the same. And there's no way, I mean, I came back to America and I was convinced that Radio 1 wasn't the place to go, that I was too old for it and they were using younger people. And I met a producer and just had a tour around the new studios. And he said, do you ever think about coming back? I said, no, not really. I don't think. He said, you can't really go back and do things over again. He said, no. He said, I think actually Derek Chenery would say, excuse this language. He said, Derek Chenery, who was the former head of Radio 1, would actually quite like to stick a red hot poke up your ass. Was the terminology used, not very BBC there. But there has been a change at the top at Radio 1, and so the sort of door opened again. And one day I was sitting at GWR, the ILR station in the West Country, and it was just like the ideas just suddenly jumped in my head, hey, let's go back to Radio 1. So I rang him up, and it happened.
Really?
But I think now we're at a very exciting time for radio, because for so many years we've lagged behind. We make the best music, but as I said last night, we've got such an antiquated system that eventually, I think, well, before too long, it should open up a bit more.
I think you're probably right. We keep our fingers crossed anyway.
Yeah.
As far as your Radio 1 shows are concerned, now, of course you do put in a lot of new material. Indeed, you're still taking a lot of material from the United States, don't you? Is that because you still have a lot of respect for the American broadcasting system? You'd like to see something similar on this side of the water?
Well, I mean, I don't really think about whether music comes from America or where it comes from, really. It's just judged.
As long as it's good. That's everything, yeah.
As long as it's good.
Now, obviously, over these 20 years, a lot of things have happened. You, in your outlook on radio in general, I think it's fair to say it's not the radioing, but it's the music is what you're particularly into. You're into putting the music across to the listener and making sure that they get what's best in radio. Obviously, what Caroline's all about, even to this day, is music right the way through. But we have talked today about other radio stations which have more to offer than just music. We're looking at Radio S65 on the old Knock John station, which was the first local radio station as such. Now, you said earlier, you spent a little while down in the West Country there, of course, with GWR. Your time there, was that an interesting experience, ILR radio?
Yeah, it was. I first of all went to Radio West in Bristol, and they had a lot of financial problems. And then was tempted further up the M4. Everybody thought Walker's gradually getting back to London. You know, he's gone from Bristol to Wiltshire to Swindon, then he'll go to Reading, and then. But no, I knew the sort of radio I'd do there. I'd be doing more interview and feature and talk radio, which is something I hadn't done a lot of. So it seemed a good idea to sort of add another string to the bow, as it were. I mean, there's different kinds of radio and there's different kinds of DJs. Some are zany types like Kenny Everett or Steve Ryan. I think it's a brilliant DJ. And others perhaps like to put the music a bit sort of more than themselves in a way. But I mean, in terms of communication, I don't ever feel that I've really achieved what I used to do on 9 to Midnight on Caroline. There was just something very special about the radio station. The time, being on at night as well was good. So, I don't know, it's like I was saying last night, you almost get the feeling that the best radio you've done in your career is right at the beginning.
Yes, it's funny because I was only thinking the other day, I'm a second generation offshore man, if you like, from that point of view. But funny enough, I served my apprenticeship with Radio 1, if you like, in that I remember listening to your show at the lunchtime session and the playground, as it were, and the field at school. And you always come across, if I may say, so as a very warm sort of personality on the radio. You're genuinely into putting the radio across to the listener as a person-to-person sort of relationship. Do you think that that's very important, rather than the American style, which is basically to fire radio at the person, shove it down their throats effectively in some ways? Do you feel that this sort of personal attitude is the thing that you developed from Caroline and have moved it through?
Well, I was very lucky really on Radio England that the Americans that run it there's myself, Roger Day, and a guy called Brian Tilney. None of us have been on the radio before. So everything initially we learned from them. And they were just very keen on the making each listener feel as if you were doing the show for them. And whereas a lot of Radio London DJs would do this, ladies and gentlemen, and Tony Windsor used to, Mike Lennox had this big long catchphrase of boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, kittens and cousins and all of that. And to me that you just reminded the person listening that they were one of a huge number. And it was the American DJs really, and sort of just never ever say plurals, just talk to one person. And so they taught me, a very good lesson really.
Very interesting. Now, can I just go back to we heard a lot of the technical side of offshore radio, the days of your One thing that I've been very interested to know, you mentioned the laissez-faire there, which you spent some time on. Many of us here seen photographs of the laissez-faire and heard the story of the dramatic setup and the equally dramatic decline of the station. But on board that ship, just where exactly were the various bits and pieces, the sort of the studios and the mess room? We've seen the outside, but nobody really knows the inside of it. Perhaps you can explain the ins and outs of that ship to us.
Well, it was a bit of a tip. The Texans, Bill Vick and Don Pearson, said to fitters in America, I think it was in Miami actually, it was fitted out, and they said, I want a radio station on a ship in 2 weeks, I don't care what it cost. So what they did is prefabricated the transmitter and studio rooms and just lowered them in through the hold at the front part of the ship. They didn't put in any extra accommodation at all. They put an antenna up which looked like a bloody great drain pipe. And one of the American DJs joined the ship at Miami. And he said, we were sitting there in the harbour when there was just a gentle ripple. The old antenna was going like this. And he's thinking to himself, Christ, if it's doing that in the harbour, what's it going to do when we get out the sea? Fall down, which it did the moment it left Miami.
Yes.
So they stopped at Lisbon.
There's some very interesting photographs of you actually in that studio complex with the old carousel machine. That must be one of the first stations to use any form of carousel. What was that all about? Why was the decision taken to use such a piece of equipment on that ship?
Well, I think it was for Britain Radio because they wanted it to be 24 hours. So they had 3 reel-to-reel tape machines and the carousel, which you could load up with about 30 cartridges. And then you could run the station on automatic. And they bought these tapes of Frank Sinatra and stuff like that. And an American announcer would go into the studio once every couple of months and he'd never listen to the music. He'd just sort of, vocal stylings there from Frank Sinatra, that sort of thing. And there were cue dots on the tape which fired off the next tape or fired off the carousel. We used to call him David. And he used to get letters, this bloke. And when they were short-staffed on Britain Radio or the weather was bad and they had trouble playing records, we'd put David on, you see. And these women used to write and they'd say, it's disgusting what you make that David do. The hours he has to work. But the only thing that kept Radio England and Britain Radio on the air to begin with was Garner Ted Armstrong. And I don't know about his organisation, but they don't spend a lot of money on tape. And they used to send the programs out in stuff called Mylar tape, which I think they got from Woolworths. And what used to happen, 6 o'clock, Garner Ted Armstrong time, so whoever's on the air would introduce it. Not like it's time for the God show, as Kenny Everett once said, but it's time for the world tomorrow. And then they'd bugger off upstairs, for beer or something, because they think, Garner Ted's going to do his stuff for the next half hour. But this cheap tape used to stick. And then it would stop the machine, the tension would go on the spool. And of course, we're all upstairs listening avidly to Garner Ted.
That's awesome.
So sometimes he'd be off the air for 10 minutes and nobody'd know. And of course, then there'd be memos come out. If anything goes wrong one more time, he's going to cancel and then the station will be off the air. So we literally, the next tape we all got down on our knees and we put it on his shoe and we said, right, Garner, go for it, mate.
Please don't stop.
Of course, you spent most of your time with Carol on the old Mi Amigo, the South ship there. How did it work out that the various staff were split between the South and North? Why was it that you didn't actually go to the North ship? Did you have a preference for the Mi Amigo as a vessel to live and work on?
You didn't really have, we knew it was there, obviously, and they knew we were there, but you didn't really have too much contact between the two. I remember somebody decided, it might have been Ronan, said that this guy seems to be doing well up north called Tony Prince. So they sent Tony Prince out for a couple of weeks, and he used to do his show raving, standing up, you roar, the whole stuff. But nobody in the South understood a word he said. So he went back to the North ship. So there wasn't an awful lot of communication.
Did you ever visit the North ship?
I never did, no.
Really?
No.
Oh,
Listen, when you've been 2 weeks on ship, and you go around to Caroline House and there's 50 gorgeous young women there, you don't think about taking the trip.
I suppose
to
you've
the
got a
North.
point, yes. Well, now, obviously, as things went on into 1968, you're well aware of what happened in March 68. How did you feel when the thing suddenly vanished from the air and both the ships suddenly disappeared? That was the end of it. Did you really think, God, this is it, or did you see it coming effectively?
No, I had no idea it was coming. It was the worst moment of the whole thing, really. We were just completely shattered. I had some wonderful times finishing at midnight, then going into the mess room and getting a couple of Weetabix scones and tea, and just starting chats about anything and everything with the guys on there, and particularly the Dutch crew, who used to have amazing stories to tell. And we just sit up talking till about 2 or 3 in the morning. And that night, I think it was Monday, March the 3rd, was it?
Yes.
Sunday night, after the show, I went to bed sort of very early, 3:30 Monday morning. And the first thing I knew was somebody shaking my shoulder saying, wake up, there's tugs. And I said, oh, go away, leave me alone. I had about 2 hours sleep. So eventually they convinced me something really serious was going on. And I went upstairs and I mean, it was like a bad dream. I was hardly awake and I was staggering around the ship. There was a whole bunch of very strong-looking Dutch sailors there. And one of them said, you've 10 minutes to get your stuff out of the studio and then we're going to seal it up. So there was just total confusion. And because I was half asleep, I thought, well, this can't be for real, So I never went in the studio and got my takes. And I lost an awful lot of really good things. Each of the Beatles doing IDs for me, John Lennon on the Johnnie Walker show and stuff like that.
So,
Which was a bit sad losing those. And then, and people were saying, well, maybe we're just going to Amsterdam to have the hole scraped or something. And then when I saw them cut the anchor chain, we had a massive great anchor that used to belong to a large oil tanker that was moored in Rotterdam harbour one night, and for some reason it fell off. It's also quite an amazing coincidence that a small boat belonging to the Dutch company happened to be underneath it at the time and brought it out to the ship. So, because I think we dragged our anchor in some bad storms. So actually securing the anchor was a major operation. And if Caroline was going to go to Amsterdam and then come back, obviously they would have taken the anchor chain off the boat and fixed it onto a buoy or something, so they could just come back and couple up. But they just sawed it through with a hacksaw and it just fell into the sea. And it was that moment then I realised that it looked like it was all over. And we just got towed across the North Sea. Then we went into the canal system to go up to Amsterdam. And the worst thing about it is I remember that man's fight for freedom thing about going up the Thames in victory. And there we were going up the canals to Amsterdam, and it was totally the opposite. And nobody in the Caroline organisation in Amsterdam knew what was going on either. It was just utter confusion. So I hung around for about a week, I think, and thought, well, I've got to get back to England and see if I can find out what's going on there.
Did you
But
actually...
it was the worst thing about it was, I mean, there were times, occasionally you get claustrophobia out on the ship, especially if the weather was bad or it was foggy for a number of days. And some nights I go out and I thought, I would just want to get off. I want to go to a pub or something. It was knowing you couldn't. But that was very rare. The worst times are when you went off the air, because the whole magic about the ship was the fact that you were beaming out and there was energy there, and you did feel things come back. There's no question that it was a two-way thing, and that when you'd done a good show you knew, because you just got that feeling back. And so to go off the air as we did, with nobody having any warning about it, and nobody knowing why, and nobody knowing when we were going to come back, you just had such a feeling of frustration.
I mean, when you came in, did the North ship coincide with you as it came in? Did you end up going in together into Amsterdam, or did they arrive later or something?
No, they arrived later on. But the tugs that arrived at the North ship at exactly the same time as the South ship, I think about 5 a.m, which is the perfect time, of course, to do something like that. And very carefully planned, obviously, that they both arrived at the same time.
Well, there we are. It's history. It happened, but it's still there, and you're still here.
Well,
very pleased to say.
Yeah, well, we're all still here, aren't we?
That's right, and that's the main thing. Well, let's briefly throw the floor open. Would anybody like to blast a few questions at tactful ones? I hasten to add at Johnny.
No, it's just the way it happened. I mean, a way in sort of almost in radio terms, in the structure of the day, it was another show, and it was the end of a show, and I was on until midnight. So it would seem like the normal thing to do was that at midnight, you know, at the end of my show, I'd sort of make the announcement. And Ronan said we talked about it, and he said, just make sure you get the Beatles' All You Need Is Love on. I played that record. It was the B-side, the music of the Ballad of the Green Berets, which was interesting to take a record that sort of supported the idea of war and use it for another youth. But I discovered an instrumental on the other side, and I was sitting in the production studio one night, and I just thought, it just sort of came to me, the idea of doing it. So I wrote these few things, and because at the time what happened, we had the newer DJs out there, and they in a way looked to Robbie and me because we were sort of the old hands at it, as it were, just to keep their morale up. And there were times, especially when Radio 1 came on the air, and eventually got newspapers and saw all the publicity, and Caroline never got a mention in the press. So and there were times when your morale really sunk, and you thought, we're fighting a losing battle here. So I just had the idea that really to do it, to put over a positive idea of what actually might be achieved by us hanging on in there. And I just changed the words to coincide with where the music changed. And it took me all night, actually. It was about 6.5 hours, really, to do it. I finally finished it about 9 o'clock in the morning. But embarrassed a bit sometimes when I hear it. But it just seemed a good idea at the time. I'd been having some difficult times in America. My wife and I split up. She'd come back to England with my daughter, and I stayed there with my son. And I moved from San Francisco to Washington, and it just became very difficult to try and earn my living and look after my boy. So I was very ready to sort of come back in a way. And someone I knew on the radio in San Francisco was a very keen fan of English music and pirate radio. And they actually were the ones who rang me and said, did I know Caroline was coming back? And I said, no, I hadn't heard about it. I think it was written about in an American magazine. So I went to New York and met the people there. And I was very keen to come back, and it seemed a really good way to actually return, to actually do some radio. From a personal point of view, I wanted my son to be with his sister again and to see his mum. And I thought, as regards me and my missus, if I did, say, a month or 6 weeks on the ship and then came back for a couple of weeks and then went back to the ship, that would be a sort of just testing the water to see how we got on after a couple of years apart. And then when I got back to England and hired DJs and things, it was just the delays. I started to realise that it wasn't as advanced in terms of preparation as I thought it was. And the weeks sort of rolled on, and I signed on a dole. I was living down in Ramsgate because of my wife's relatives are there, and I thought it was quite a handy place to be if I might end up going out to the North Sea. Via Holland, of course.
Spain.
Spain, oh sorry, Spain, yeah. Sorry, bit old-fashioned here. But anyway, time rolled on. It was a year went by, really. I mean, you hang on and you think, well, I waited this long for it, and they must be getting it ready. And it's no use me thinking of doing something else. I just wait a few more weeks. And before you know where you are, a year's gone by. And if you haven't been on the radio for a year, I mean, I don't know if anybody here is sort of signing on every couple of weeks, but it's the system seems to be designed that they treat you really bad in the DHSS. They've got a difficult job to do, but just the system seems to be to keep you down instead of trying to help you. I mean, it might have changed a lot now with schemes and things, but no, it's words. But you know what it's like, after a year of that, you start to feel like a second-class citizen, and you see TV commercials for all these things that you haven't got any money to buy, and people in jobs are living a nice lifestyle. And it really, your confidence goes in yourself. So after a year, I knew I had to think about doing something. And somebody said, why don't you go to Radio West in Bristol, because Dave Cash is in charge there. And so I did, and so I started work again. Well, I personally do, yeah, I thought it was the best. But it's different strokes for different folks, you know. I mean, I know people who thought Radio London was great because they were more professional in a way. But I personally, I enjoyed working more on Caroline because that didn't matter so much. It's like if the feeling's there, that's good enough. Whereas on Radio London, it's got to sound right, you know, and just different styles of station, really. But I mean, Caroline always had, and still does, obviously. I mean, the fact it's still there after all this time is quite incredible. And there is something very special about it. And there probably always will be. It's the most famous... It's the most famous pirate radio station in the world. And when I went to America after the BBC, I did some work for this radio station, and I produced 5 one-hour documentaries, radio documentaries. And I decided, after mentioning Radio Caroline and playing an old clip, the switchboard just lit up at the radio station, and they just couldn't believe what had gone on in England in the 60s. So I did a 2-hour documentary on the history of British radio, and the response to it was absolutely incredible. People really thought that the whole Caroline story and the history and everything was just incredible. So it is famous throughout the world, really. And I'm very proud to, you know, if I had my time over again, of course I'd do exactly the same thing. Sometimes wish I could live it over again too, to a second.
That can do. I said tactical questions.
If you didn't hear it, the question was, would I go back? The answer's no, actually. Not because I don't think it would be, but you know, I couldn't sort of fulfill a useful purpose there. But I really enjoy going to see. At the moment, I spend 3 or 4 days in London, and I go back to Gloucestershire where my children are, and I really value that time with them. And you know, we had, as I say, we had ups and downs, and we're separated and things like that. So, to me, missing out on one. I mean, Sam now is nearly 13 and Beth's 11, and they're just great kids. And I wouldn't like to be away for sort of 6 weeks, 8 weeks at a time, really. It's a job for young men to go out there to the North Sea, really. I don't know, actually. I mean, I just hope that this green paper and these 3 new independent national stations they're talking about, I just hope it does happen, and it happens soon.
Yeah.
Because it'll be a good time to be in radio then, because there'll be more opportunities. So I don't look too long term, really. I thought Laser was brilliant. It really was a good station. And it was funny, it's very like a Radio England format. But you could hear, but listening to Capital Radio and to Radio 1, the difference that Laser made. I mean, one thing I thought they did was interesting. The whole format was that it's all hit radio. And it's been a tradition, really, in British radio that when a record falls out of the charts, then it's dead for at least a year or maybe 2 years before it then qualifies as an oldie. Whereas Laser would take records that were hits 2-3 months ago and play it. And funny enough, I thought it's nice to hear them again. And so they introduced something brand new, really, to British radio in that respect. And you could hear Capital cutting down the chat, Radio 1 cutting down the chat, getting on with the music more, which just proves what I've always said all along, that the more stations, the better. Because competition breeds, you know, makes people try harder, and also gives the listener more choice too. But I like listening to Laser. I mean, it was quite a good station, good energy too.
Just to the other end, I mean, do you ever tune down the other end of the dial every now and again and listen to the old mate?
Yeah, I do, yeah. I like to check and see if she's still there. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a lovely idea. I think it'd be great. It'd be a great tourist attraction too, if it was moored alongside the Thames. But I mean, there might be somebody in this room who actually wants us to keep it out there in the North Sea. But I don't know. I mean, You'd have to ask the person you know I'm talking about
But
as to whether the roster of aims should sail up the Thames one day or not. I don't know. I mean, that was the dream that I had then, that we all hoped for, was that the government would actually say, okay, listen, let's have a Radio Caroline on land. But of course, because we defied them, and because we made their whole system look a bit ineffectual, then of course I've learned there was no way they would ever back down and say, oh, you guys are right, we were wrong. Sorry, we gave you a hard time, here's a license. You know, but I don't know, who knows what the future's going to bring. Any station that can get an audience would work. I mean, the only thing I tend to feel, which I might not like me saying, is that 20 years on, pirate radio, I feel the emphasis has switched to land-based radio. And I think what the land-based pirate stations are proving is that ILR is become independent regional radio. A lot of stations are joining together just to survive. And there is a real need for community radio. And I've seen the way it works, we all have really. I mean, I mentioned on LBC that the Chief Constable in Birmingham actually congratulated the radio station playing reggae and black music for helping dispense information after the Handsworth riots and just calming people down. So, I mean, there could be a national station with a Caroline for that, but one of the things I'd like to see is just community radio, lots of different types of stations for, you know, minorities who aren't catered for at the moment, particularly black music. The question was, could it be that it was the government or the authorities in some way that were behind the two ships being pirated, if you like, and in March of '68? I honestly don't think so. I mean, and that's not naive.
you will get the
Pardon?
best. You figure out part of that stuff.
Yeah.
So, Victor,
I don't think they would, because I think if they had been found out that they were actually behind that act, I think it would have. They knew that it really would make them extremely unpopular, and I really think it was a personal argument between someone and the company involved who carried out the act. I think a personal or a business argument. I don't think it was anything more sinister than that. And I think the government truly believed that eventually the money would run out and the stations would just go off the air that way. So that's my feeling anyway.
I think it's fair to say that whether that's the case or not, quite honestly, today we're celebrating 20 years since the other date, the 14th of August 1967. I mean,
Sorry, can I interrupt you?
yeah, go ahead, yeah.
The other thing about that, if they were going to do it, they should have done it on the 15th of August, really, or a few weeks after. Why wait, until March to do it?
I think the main thing is, Johnny, that you're here today, 20 years and one day after that particular event. For me anyway, and I'm sure for the rest of us at the Caroline Movement, it's a highlight for us to have the opportunity for you to come forward and celebrate this marvellous occasion with us. All right, it may not be, it's a little sad to look at that particular date, but let's face it, they are still there. We're still able to enjoy the nostalgia. I hope you've enjoyed it today with us here.
Well, I think a lot of Caroline fans have thought through the years that those of us who worked on the stations have turned their back on that sort of thing. I mean, the reason I haven't really turned up at events like this before is, in a way, I feel it's living in the past, as it were. And I've always been somebody who likes to live for today, or, rather than trade on what's happened in the past. But I think it's great that you all get together in the way that you do. And obviously the 20th was something really special. And I think what's nice too is that, I mean, obviously for all of us here, we would celebrate it, but the fact there's been so much interest in Caroline and what's happened, and the fact that it can go out on LBC, it can go out on the BBC, it can be in the newspapers, even though the lady still happens to be there, I think it says a lot, really, for Caroline and all she's achieved.
You were saying earlier on that you have family in the Ramsgate area, and of course since...
Well, in Gloucestershire now.
Oh, right, they moved now. I was going to say, because of course now the ladies move around within sight of Ramsgate again now, so it's cool to see it. Ever had any thought about just going and having a look and just seeing it again?
Well, I went when they did that black and white documentary. I was really hoping I was going to get to Printon because I'd never ever been to Printon. And there's a few people who had cars running over their houses or backed into their hedges and things throughout the years. So I could knock on the door and say sorry about all these cars that were here in 67. No, I went to a cafe in Walton on Naze to.
I wonder where that was where it was filmed, was it? I wonder where it was.
Yeah, in the cab. I got free egg chips out of that. But no, I haven't been down to Ramsgate for a while. I think that would be a good time to go, actually.
Yes, in fact, as I say, she's there now, and you can see her quite clearly on a reasonable day. Well, there we are. It's 20 years on, and you're still with us. Everybody's here. Ladies and gentlemen, isn't it good to have you back with us again, yeah? Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.